Prophet's emigration. The Prophet came to Abu Bakr and told him that God had given him permission to emigrate from Mecca. Abu Bakr exclaimed, "Together, O Prophet of God," for he was anxious to keep him company. Then Abu Bakr presented 2 camels he had been keeping for the purpose. Abdullah ibn Urayqit was hired by Abu Bakr to act as a guide. The emigration of the Prophet illustrates how everything howsoever coveted by one can be sacrificed for the sake of one's faith or ideals. Worldly estate and effects or any other thing that a man is disposed to value can never take the place of his faith, nor can the faith be bartered away for the entire world. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but suffers the loss of his soul? Mecca was the birthplace of the Prophet. As the homeland of the Prophet of God and his companions, it was very dear to them. It also had the house of God, loved and adored by them like the light of one's eye. But nothing stood in the way of their bidding farewell to their hearts and homes, families and kinsmen. This was due to the fact that the pagans of Mecca would not allow them the freedom of conscience and liberty to practice their faith. The Prophet loved Mecca, but he valued his faith more. One was a natural feeling of affection and the other an insatiable thirst of soul. We find the 2 tenderest feelings of human nature articulately expressed by the Prophet, while leaving Mecca. "No city is sweeter to me than you, and how ardently I love you. Had my people not exiled me, I would never have lived anywhere else." The Prophet had, in truth, to leave his homeland to fulfill his Lord's command. "O my bondmen who believe! Lo! My earth is spacious. Therefore serve me only." Quran 29:56. Towards the cave of Thor. The Prophet and Abu Bakr stealthily proceeded to the cave of Thor. Abu Bakr instructed his son Abdullah to find out the hostile plans and conversations of the Meccans concerning them and then relay these to him. Furthermore, he asked Amir ibn Fuhaira, his slave, to feed his flocks of milchew by the day and bring food for them in the evening. Asma, his daughter, used to bring food for them at night. Abu Bakr exhibited great concern for the Prophet of God during this journey. It is related that when the Prophet set out for the cave of Thor, Abu Bakr sometimes went ahead of the Prophet, and then behind him, until the Prophet noticed his restlessness and asked, "Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, what's the matter? Often you come behind me and sometimes you go ahead." Abu Bakr replied, "O Prophet of God, when I think of those pursuing you, I come behind you, but then I apprehend an ambuscade so that I go in front of you." When they arrived at the cave of Thor, Abu Bakr requested the Prophet to wait until he had searched and cleaned up the cave. So, he went in, explored it and came out after cleaning up. Then he remembered that he had not properly searched one hole. He again asked the Prophet to wait a bit so he can check it for the second time around. Only then did he allow the Prophet to enter the cave after he had fully convinced himself that it did not harbor wild or dangerous beasts. A most critical moment of human history. The most critical moment of the world's history, when the fate of mankind hanged by a thread, drew near as the Qurayshite horsemen on the lookout for the 2 fugitives galloping over the desert and came to the cave where the 2 had secluded themselves. The world was as if at a standstill, holding its breath in suspense. The pursuers, who stood debating among themselves at the mouth of the cave, resolved that nobody could be inside it. One may think it is fantastic or miraculous, but it was how God helped his Prophet. Then Allah caused his peace of reassurance to descend upon him and supported him with hosts cannot see. Quran 9:40. Peering, Abu Bakr looked over his head. He saw the bloodthirsty warriors of the Quraysh standing at the mouth of the cave. Then he said to his companion with a trembling heart, "O Prophet of God, they will see us if anybody steps forward." "What misgivings have you," replied the Prophet, "about the 2 with whom the third is Allah?" It was as if to remind that at this event, the revelation came down from God. When they 2 were in the cave, when he said to his comrade, "Grieve not, lo! Allah is with us." Quran 9:40. Suraka follows the Prophet. The Quraysh offered a reward of 100 camels to anyone who brought back the Prophet, dead or alive. The Prophet spent 3 nights in the cave and then, guided by Amir ibn Fuhaira, went along the road by the seacoast. Suraka ibn Malik ibn Jusham heard of the price set by the Quraysh on the head of the Prophet, and hurried after him. The reward of 100 camels was too tempting for him that he got up on his mare and went after the fugitives, tracking their footsteps. He let his mare run swiftly until he nearly overtook the fugitives. But, lo, his mare stumbled abruptly, and hitherto, he was thrown off. He rose up, composed himself, and remounted the mare, and let her go ahead. Once more, the mare stumbled and he was again thrown off, but nevertheless continued the chase until he could see the 3 men going ahead. Suddenly, his mare stumbled for the 3rd time, its forelegs sinking up to the knees on the ground, and he was thrown off once again. He also saw dust rising from the ground like a sandstorm. Suraka was now convinced that the prophet was protected against him and he would not in any case triumph over the latter. He called out saying that he was Suraka ibn Jusham and that he would not inflict any harm to them. The prophet ordered Abu Bakr to ask him what he wants from them. Suraka replied, "Write for me a warrant of security." Thereupon the prophet ordered Amir ibn Fuhaira to write the warrant, which he wrote on a piece of tanned leather or bone. Suraka preserved the document as a memento of sorts. Imnisham, Bolli, pp. De 489 a 90, al-Bukhari, Shap. Ijatun Nabi. The prophet of God had been driven out of his homeland and the enemy pursuing him was after his blood, but his mind's eye was envisioning the day when his followers would be ascendant upon the realms of the Caesars and Khosrows. In those adverse circumstances, in the darkest hour of his life, he made a prediction of the bright times ahead. To Suraka he said, "Suraka, how will you feel when you will put on Khosrow's bracelets? God has indeed promised succor, victory and prosperity to his prophet, and the triumphant ascendancy of his religion of truth. He it is who hath sent his messenger with the guidance and the religion of truth, that he may cause it to prevail over all religions, however much the disbelievers may be averse." Quran 9:33. Those who cannot see beyond the material agency of causes and effects would shrug their shoulders at this prediction. The Quraysh discarded the forebodings of the prophet as incredulous and inconceivable, but the foreseen prophet was peeping into the future. Lo! Allah faileth not to keep the tryst. Quran 13:31. And the events took shape exactly in the same way as the prophet had foretold to Suraka. When Persia was conquered and the tiara, robe and the bracelets of Khosrows were brought to Umar, he sent for Suraka and asked him to put on the royal dress. Suraka took the warrant of security, for he was by then convinced of the victory of the prophet. He offered some provisions and utensils, but the prophet accepted nothing from him. He simply said to Suraka, "Keep our whereabouts secret." The blessed guest, Abu Bakr and the prophet, passed by the tent of a Mabed, a woman of Khuzai, who had a milk ewe but its udder had dried up owing to drought. God's messenger wiped its udder with his hand and mentioning the name of God the Most High, he prayed that a Mabed might have a blessing in her ewe. It then gave a flow of milk. He first gave a Mabed and others a drink until all of them were fully satisfied, then he drank knowing everyone was through. He milked it the second time around and when the vessel was full, left it with her. When Abu Mabed came back and his wife told him about the prodigious happening and the angelic stranger, he replied, "By God, he appears to be the same man of the Quraysh whom they are prowling after." They continued their journey with the guide until they reached Quba in the vicinity of Medina. This was on Monday, the 12th day of Rabi al-Awwal. September 24, 622 AD. A new era was indeed commencing, because it was from the start of this year that the Islamic calendar of Hijra took its humble beginnings.